Hello and welcome to today's program, ladies and gentlemen. Ladies and gentlemen, today we are going to be discussing several points relating to one Donald Trump's suggestion that he will do a trade deal with the Taliban in order to regain control of the Bagram air base in Afghanistan, because he thinks it's what the U.S. needs to keep an eye on China. And of course, he's made this promise in case he's re-elected as a president in 2024. On top of that, apart from the fact that this is a very strange statement, given that they have evacuated Afghanistan and the Taliban are back in power there as part of the deal that they have made with them in Qatar. We'll also be discussing the importance of the base, of course, where it's located, and the Hindukush mountains that are traditionally considered the security belt of Central Asia, China, and parts of Iran. Today, again, I have with me Mr. Abdul Naser Noorzad, a political and geopolitical analyst. We had a program with him last time when we spoke about the role of Pakistan and Afghanistan in the current crisis that was going off. Today, we'll be discussing the points I mentioned. As my first question to Mr. Noorzad, I would like to ask him that, given that Donald Trump did initiate the very Doha deal that we know with the Taliban and eventually was concluded with Biden, they evacuated everything they had in Afghanistan, or it's presumed that they have done so. Why is he talking about returning to Bagram air base, once he gets reelected? Is that even practical for them, even if he gets reelected, to actually strike a trade deal with Taliban to come back to Bagram? And why does he even want to be there?
Bismillah ar-Rahman Rahim. Good day to you, Pamir, Mamoon, and our dear viewers and compatriots. To discuss this issue, we have to take into account two dimensions of this issue. First, don't take him serious. Trump is a businessman. He doesn't fit into political figures still. However, he has served for one term as a president of the United States. There are many revelation about his attitude, his views on the politics. As his national security advisor, John Bolton, wrote a book. He revealed there that many times when they were talking about Afghanistan, Trump mistakenly replaced Afghanistan in mentioning Ukraine. And that time there was no war in Ukraine. So he still is not aware of the reality of politics. Or what he says is somehow it has a domestic use for the electoral campaign. Normally, when the rivals, the candidates, present their speeches in order to attract voters' attention, they draw some sort of some points which are very attractive and very sensitive for the voters. So this is a big flaw for the Democrats, that they have already left Afghanistan. However, we know that the roadmap to withdraw from Afghanistan was initially started during the Trump administration. This is a clear fact. Nobody can deny it. So his assertion is like a businessman, as he has mentioned many times, that if he wins for the second time, his administration will automatically enter in a deal and will deal with the Taliban as a trader to lease some bases, such as Bagram base, and will have their presence there. The second thing is that if we look into the realities which exist regarding the geopolitics of Hindukush, which is very important, Bagram base still enjoys a very important value in the geopolitics of the rival powers in Afghanistan, such as the United States and the Asian allies. When we talk about the Asian allies has a different view on background and generally in Hindukush, but the United States sees it in a different manner. For example, the Asian allies such as the Russian Federation, the Chinese Republic of China, and Iran government see the Hindukush as a defense fence or security fence against any kind of forward strategy by the United States, while the United States see this issue as a forward policy in order to destabilize more the security of the region and somehow challenge their rivals, I mean the Asian allies. So this is another thing which we're going to discuss in a broad-based manner and analyze all the dimensions. As I have written many articles on the importance of geopolitics of Hindukush, I think that in the course of history and the whole experience that we all have been through is showing that Hindukush is a red line for the Asian allies. And the United States know that if they conquer this area, but the next step will be very easy. We know that as far as the security and importance of Hindukush is concerned, the United States is still regret that why they left Afghanistan. But we have this reality that the United States was forced to leave Afghanistan by the Asian allies. There were some challenges ahead of New World Order geopolitics, which based on that, the United States had its presence during the 20 years, and they had no remedy otherwise to deal with the Taliban, such a proxies which are very honest. And I'm contrary to this sort of perception that the Doha deal has been violated many times. I think that both the United States and the Taliban are still very honest and have kept their promises to observe all the articles fitted in the Doha deal. For example, the United States promised the Taliban to leave Afghanistan and hand them over the political power, which has been very honest. The Taliban also promised the United States to keep an eye on their major interests in Afghanistan, such as we have numerously heard about the so-called virtual presence of or invisible presence of the United States in Afghanistan. I think this is a very sensitive issue, which makes Afghanistan case very special. And I think that in the future, the United States is somehow trying to keep this option available, dealing with the Taliban in order to keep its interest. Otherwise, if in some time that the United States see that there is no possibility of continuing with such a strategy, they will have automatically their other available options, such as we have seen recently that there have been many circles, many fronts created by the so-called internal allies of the United States in the United States, such as these former Republic generals who have created many fronts and from the United States, claiming that they're going to fight against the Taliban and will resist. From other hand, we must not, we should not ignore this fact that if we see strategically, this assertion does not have any logic based on the military perception. If the Trump administration is intending to have a base in background in order to prevent any kind of forward policy by the Chinese, or maybe prevent them to not to use any kind of a nuclear weapon, this does not have any kind of logic. If you are living in a 21st century and the intercontinental ballistic missiles, the nuclear, the technology would provide you many opportunities to fight far from the geography that your enemies exist, then I think that Trump is still not aware of the realities and just somehow want to make it as a domestic use in order to rises popularity and upcoming elections, and somehow put the blame on Biden administration by signaling and highlighting such a big flaws in United States strategic objective in Afghanistan.
That's correct. There's no doubt that Donald Trump uses such failures, as if you may call it, or such blunders as it's been called in their own Western media, in order to strike their rivals in the elections and everything. And of course, what he says about returning to the Bagram airfield, of course, militarily, if you want to come back to Bagram airfield, it's not to monitor China's missile production or activity that's 1 hour away from that base. Well, you were in Afghanistan and you were in monitor of more than just China's military activities in that region. You're close to Central Asia, to Russia, to Iran, and all the others that you're currently dealing with. Of course, what he says is very, very. It's said in a sense in order to help him for his electoral campaign. But what he said about China occupying Bagram Air Base now. Now, we've had programs about over a year ago where we had reports of Chinese activity around that Bagram Air Base, and there were reports that the Taliban may be allowing China to use that base from now on. And now Donald Trump just comes out and says that China occupies the base now that we have evacuated it, and this is a failure on Biden's part. And then we spoke about the Doha deal. If the Doha deal wasn't violated, in fact, if we assume that that hasn't happened, given that America was the reason Taliban exists today, if the Doha deal is not violated, so why is there Chinese presence in the Bagram Air Base as he claims? Why is there problems happening across northern Afghanistan, and there are challenges happening to Taliban in Afghanistan? And why are they talking about the return of the Republican forces against the Taliban? And if that is even possible, we can assume that is possible because America has been the leaders in creating and funding and arming groups across the world. They may be able to arm them as well. How practical is it for them to fund the Republicans in order to overthrow the Taliban, and then through the Republican forces, they can just return back to Afghanistan? Doesn't that mean that the Doha deal is actually off the table and that's actually a failure?
No, I don't think so. That they are still thinking about overthrowing the Taliban and just replace them another, maybe the remnants of the Republic. This is not a feasible option because when the United States came to Afghanistan first after 9/11, there was a regional consensus over having United States presence in Afghanistan. The Russians provided the way them to somehow provided the ground for them for their logistic supplies. Maybe the Chinese were silent, and the Iranians somehow.
There was a mutual agreement between all of them when US came. Yes.
Yes, information to them through the Taliban regime. But I think that the situation is quite different comparing the fact and taking an eye on the fact that today we have more different Afghanistan, more different region compared with the after 9/11. Regarding the presence of the Chinese in background, we don't have any clear evidences that they really exist in China in Bagram Air Base.
Of course, I think these are intelligence reports and very, very discreet reports that come through the intelligence channels. And if Donald Trump is the one claiming that the Chinese are there now, well, surely he knows something, or maybe he's just not talking just out of the blue. He might know something, and there has been reports about a year ago when there were Chinese activities were reported by intelligence channels on the ground that they were indeed the Taliban were helping the Chinese to somehow use that air base for some purpose that's unknown at this point. So it could be that it could be or it could not be. It could be anything.
I think he might have been drunk. He might have been joking about talking about the Chinese, because given the fact that, yes, the United States and both the Chinese are very active in the ground, and they are somehow trying to have their proper influence on the ground, because we see Afghanistan as a geography without the states, and everybody is involved to have their proper in a special location and their presence in Afghanistan. But as far as that Chinese presence is concerned, I think that the Chinese are so much smart. They are pursuing another different strategies. I mean, they don't have any interest to have such a military presence. Yes, they have a very huge presence in Afghanistan. Their embassy is so much active. They have money traders, businessmen, the so-called businessmen. They have their operatives inside Afghanistan. They are in very good relation with the Taliban, as they recently
just like everyone else in the region. Yes.
Yes, they are more active rather than the Russians and the Iranians, maybe.
Yes.
But it does not mean that they have presence in the United States have to deal once again to come to take the background air base in order to prevent them not to pursue their forward policy toward the south. We have the same policy pursuing by the regional allies, such as the Russians, the Iranians, and the Chinese. We also have forward policy by the United States, but the contradiction is that, or the difference is that the United States want to pursue a forward policy toward the north, but the regional allies want to not to let the United States to pursue this forward policy to the north. Instead, they want to pursue this forward policy to the south, or maybe keep or have a status quo inside Afghanistan. Because the big difference between their strategies is that the United States want to expand, or maybe seeing some sort of expansion of this challenges of terrorism beyond the borders of Afghanistan, but the regional powers are trying to keep Afghanistan problem inside its soil, not to let to have any kind of forward policy. I think that United States has its proper mechanism for making such a big decisions. We know that there are over 15 institutions who are working together in a close cooperation and making a foreign policy red line. Having back the United States presence in Afghanistan, it requires its proper condition. We know that the region are so much active, so much sensitive about.
That's true. All right. If we speak about their presence in Afghanistan, they gave up that presence in exchange for returning the Taliban. They could have just given up and left without bringing the Taliban. There was no need for a change of government in Afghanistan if there wasn't any interest involved in bringing the Taliban back. Now, assuming, and as you've told in the beginning, that there has been no violations of the Doha deal, as you believe, if there has been no violations of the Doha deal, don't you think that the forward policies are still in place? And how is it, if the Taliban are still in power and they're still being funded by the United States, how is this program of forward policy being tackled by Iran, China, and Russia? And why is the Bagram Air Base important for China anyway, if the forward policy is to be in place? China cannot defend it from the Bagram Air Base. They will have to defend it a lot up north near their own borders, which is the Badakhshan area, which is the northern areas, which is the Hindukush area, as you spoke. So now we're talking about America not being able to return back. America won't be able to push their forward policy as they wish to, because there is a lot of challenges happening. Doesn't that mean that if the Taliban are still loyal to the Doha deal, they will still be working towards that forward policy? And the only way to tackle that is to actually fund something that works against the Taliban inside Afghanistan. Wouldn't that be the logical way to tackle this, instead of coming and making trades with the Taliban, or signing trade deals, or having economic cooperations with a group that is loyal to America through their Doha deal, and they're actively working to destabilize your region? I think China would be a lot better off if they funded someone else against the Taliban in order to push the threat back, instead of cooperating with it.
No, I think that the Taliban are a good option for pursuing such kind of policies. They're mercenaries. To give them the money, they will stand shoulder by shoulder by someone who has given them the money. When we see that both sides have been so much honest on Doha deal, it means that the Taliban have tried many times to pursue, to accomplish with their promises. The United States is still pursuing this policy. I think that its forward policy is still in place. But the problem is that the United States had underestimated the reaction of the region against this policy. They thought that once they have established the Taliban power, and then they will probably provide the grant for the other terrorist organization, or this terrorist organization will have their proper effect on the security of the Central Asians. But the regional allies, such as the Russian Federation and the Chinese, along with the Iranians, they launch a counteroffensive. It means that both politically and militarily, they were prepared such a kind of unpredicted decision by the United States by leaving Afghanistan.
So by cooperating with the Taliban, these regional powers are trying to counterattack America's forward policy by cooperating with the Taliban. If such cooperation is in fact possible, even after the Doha deal, a deal that allowed the Taliban to return back to Afghanistan with over $1 billion worth of arms and ammunitions and other military equipments that America left for them. Do you think this was a bad investment from America's part? Or do you think that such a mistake was even possible from a country like America to trust the Taliban to return them back to Afghanistan only to be betrayed? And they will open their diplomatic corridors with Iran, Russia, and China in order to challenge U.S. interests in Afghanistan. If that means that Taliban are in fact working with other regional powers in the region, then they're actively working towards tackling or slowing down America's forward policy in Afghanistan, which would be a violation of the Doha deal in my case. Because if that was the case, then that means the Doha deal is already off the table, and the Taliban may as well have just given up on that. And instead, they're trying to pursue their own agendas of trying to cement their own position in Afghanistan instead of relying on America for it. So that means if we calculate all this information that we've just discussed, it just means that from A to Z, America has just miscalculated everything with the Doha deal and with their expectations of how the Taliban will serve their interests in Afghanistan. That means it's already a failure, and the Taliban cannot help America with its forward policy in Afghanistan. And that means that America will have to find other ways in order to get back reopen their ways back to Afghanistan. And that means if they cannot do that with the Taliban, then they'll have to do it with someone else that could challenge the Taliban. Do you think there is someone else that could challenge the Taliban? Will they even do something like that, given that the Doha deal is actually broken, given everything I've just said?
Look, we have been saying that, yes, United States left Afghanistan and have left billions of dollars of weapons and ammunition in Afghanistan. And today's modern warfare, this ammunition, these weapons, do not have any kind of importance, because we know that in today's modern warfare, technology plays the first role. Then we have a sort of many other options available that if the United States notice or realize that these weapons are using against its interest, they will be able to destroy it in one day. Look,
so if they're not of importance, then why did they leave it behind?
Because it had no importance for them. If we talk about the so-called this weapon, which were the United States replaced it with the Kalashnikov AK-47, the M16, it does not have any effectiveness. It was somehow apparently a weapon, but it does not have any effectiveness. If you see that a Taliban fighter carries a M16 and they already been replaced by AK-47, it means that they already been disarmed. And it's apparently they're showing that, yes, we have such a kind of weaponry in our hand with the United States left behind, but it would not have any proper effect on the ground, because we see that the Chinese are more equipped with the modern warfare, the Russians also, the Iranians also. If we talk, look, that the Taliban today do not have any kind of air forces. In today's battle, the air forces plays a very important role. And this is
So
why
in a proxy war, for example, if we assume a forward policy that America talks about exporting terrorism towards China and Central Asia, obviously they're not going to give F-16s to the Taliban or the 22 terrorist organizations that are currently stationed in northern Afghanistan. As we can see in the Middle East, all the groups fighting each other, none of them have air force except for the states that are there, the Syrian state, the Americans and the Israelis and of course Russians that are fighting. Other groups don't have that. Hezbollah doesn't have an air force. Hamas does not have an air force. If you talk about Ansarullah, they don't have that kind of air force. They're basically, their entire technology is aerodynamics. It's basically rockets and missiles and new age aerodynamic technology. Of course, the weapons left behind in Afghanistan are basically footmen weapons. They're infantry and they're mostly vehicles that can transport them from one other to another. They're not going to leave heavy weaponry in the hands of the Taliban, obviously. So these weapons that the Taliban have, they are perfectly fit for the Taliban infantry. Taliban do not have pilots. They do not have engineers to operate bigger weapons, and they don't need bigger weapons in order to operate in Afghanistan. Afghanistan is a mountainous region. It's mostly protected by its own geography, and we know that the Soviets fought in Afghanistan for 9 years, and their air force had little effect. Their achievements were basically done by the ground forces in Afghanistan during the 9 Years' War. But of course, today the technology is a lot more advanced than it was back in the 1980s. We can assume that. We know that. But if the war is to be exported towards Central Asia through Taliban and the terrorist groups, they don't need air force to attack, for example, Tajikistan or China or something. They just have those groups. They just need to smuggle them across and just turn them into what the Taliban had. For 20 years, Taliban only did suicide bombing and whatnot. We all know that. They didn't need air force. They didn't need the missiles or things. They didn't need that. The Taliban just needed that. They just needed some kind of management from ISI, and they just did what they did. Even today, for example, if Taliban are in northern Afghanistan, the weapons they have, maybe they are not important at all, but they can be given weapons that are important. If they work towards arming these 22 terrorist organizations in order to throw them into different geographies connected to northern Afghanistan, they don't need new advanced weaponry. They just need what was left behind and more of what was left behind. Now the question is here. We're talking about a competition over the Taliban here. The competition is America's invested in Taliban to return back to Afghanistan. Now the investments happening on the Taliban with the Russian Federation, the Iran and China. They're trying to appease the Taliban in order to give up America. Is that even working? If that is working, that means America's plan is already sabotaged. The 22 terrorist organizations in the north can be dismantled or disarmed immediately if any kind of deal is made between China, Russia, Iran, and the Taliban. It could just mean that the Taliban can shift sides and go back to their Asian allies and abandon America's plan altogether. And that would just mean it was a catastrophic decision on America's part, and that the Doha deal is off the table. There is nothing to act upon because they're being countered by the very group that they invested on.
No, I think that we cannot surely talk about that the Doha deal is off the table. The Taliban get back to their hideouts and the power, and the state is completely failed. No, we are talking about the geography, which is simply called Afghanistan, and it is a good and feasible geography in order to pursue the great powers strategic goals, such as a new grid game, which is intended to have some sort of influence and presence in Central and Kafka region, which are very important, more in terms of resources, natural resources, in terms of its geography, based on the idea of Mackinder of heartland theories, which enjoys still a very important role in great powers policies. We talk about the Taliban, which they are being kept in power intentionally in order to destabilize the entire region. We cannot say that the United States is intending to send these forces to destabilize the Central Asia. No. If the Taliban is still in power, if they host all these terrorist groups, they destabilize insecure Afghanistan means destabilization and insecurity surrounding areas such as Iran. We see the Central Asia, maybe the frontiers near frontier of to the Republic of China. It means a broad-based strategic agenda which the great powers are playing in Afghanistan. Neither they face them to each other, nor it's feasible to face or have a military direct confrontation. We talk about a group which are mercenaries, which are puppet government, and they have been brought to the political power in order to keep the case of Afghanistan in a very suspended manner. I mean, the suspension of this agenda is related directly to competition between these powers in other regions. For example, if we see the war in Ukraine, which is a deadlock, and contrary to the estimation of the Russian rivals, now the Ukraine war is not going in the right side. I mean, in the right direction. There is a sort of stalemate or maybe deadlock. Neither the Russians are able to conquer more geography in order to finish this case, nor the Zelensky government, backed by the Western and European power, are able to push back the Russians and just free their land. This is a deadlock strategically. We see the war in Middle East. The Middle East case is very sensitive. Because of that, the United States and its allies back the Israelis, and then we have Hezbollah, other its allies, backed by Iran and somehow supported by Russians and Chinese in the ground. I mean, there have been three major points of confrontation, which the proxies are the major players, backed by the superpowers in order to have some sort of deadlock, in order to have more privilege. I mean, if you are able to stack your enemy on one side and then on the other side you want some privilege, you will be able to do it by prioritizing one side. I think that the case in Afghanistan is still in suspension because they still see that if they are completely failed in other regions, they will put all the option in this ground, in this geography. And I think that the Taliban is more lucky that they have such a kind of opportunity to be used and to stay at power. In the United States and other regional allies are just somehow trying to keep this status quo in Afghanistan. Once they are able to solve other regions conflict, they get back to Afghanistan and will decide about Afghanistan, whether to keep the Taliban in power or replace them with new options.
All right. As our last point of discussion here, if we analyze everything that is happening on the ground in the case of Taliban in Afghanistan, very shortly, are they serving American interests in Afghanistan right now?
Well, we cannot exactly say that, yes, it is serving on the American interest or contrary to their interest. I think the Afghanistan case is a little bit more complex. We see the Taliban.
No, the question arises because the Americans were the players behind bringing the Taliban back to the power, because they saw their interests were with the Taliban coming back to the power, because they are the ones giving them money every week. America's still giving Taliban money every week for their part in what America calls the forward policy, for example. If they're still receiving money, and if there is still the game is still in play here, and they're still working towards America's forward policy, doesn't that mean that the only logical way to deal with this for China, Russia, and Iran is to just form something across the Hindukush belt and to just counter the Taliban instead of trying to appease the Taliban into submission? Because if the Americans have given their place to the Taliban in exchange for them to further their interests in the country, that means that they have been given certain guarantees by the Taliban and, of course, the ISI. If we are to assume that no one is willing to form something against the Taliban in order to tackle the Taliban militarily, does that mean that they have hopes that the Taliban will just join the Asian Union and just get rid of America altogether? And is that even possible for Taliban? Because Taliban isn't a very independent group at all. Even if we consider them independent in some aspects, majority of them, almost 90% or even more, they're highly relying on Pakistan and the United States. So having a group like Taliban in Afghanistan and believing that they're still serving the American interests, isn't it only logical to, in order to deal with this, you need something to traditionally that can fight or resist the Taliban movements in the north? For example, the Hindukush belt that we've mentioned from the start. Yes, the Hindukush belt is something, if that is considered a security belt for all these countries around it, is it safer in the hands of the Taliban, or is it safer in the hands of people that the Russians, the Iranians, and Chinese trust? Because the Taliban, as you said, cannot be trustworthy. They're a mercenary group, and they just fight for whoever is their highest bidder. And according to me, since the Americans have given their position in Afghanistan, the Taliban, they may be the highest bidder at this point that are currently influencing Taliban's movements in Afghanistan. Do you think cooperating with the Taliban is more in the advantage of China, or is it in order to tackle these threats from happening, they need something to challenge the Taliban militarily in order to be more secure in the north?
Look, when we are talking about the Taliban, we are talking about a dependent factor. The Taliban are not independent. If the Taliban, I think the Taliban are in a quite complex situation. They are in a position that neither they can return the Americans to have their presence in order to keep them in power, nor they're able to join the regional powers. If they join the regional powers, that would mean for Taliban a suicide. I mean, the United States in its ally would not allow them to join the region. Not a region allows the Taliban to join the United States. It's a very complex situation. The Taliban are still thinking about how to choose a right option, which I think that the Taliban will not be able to choose the right option.
Right.
The second thing, that if we talk about giving $40 million per week by the United States, such amount of money are being given to the Taliban by the Chinese. I think that they provide them everything that they need. I think the regional power and next to regional power are investing at the same level on the Taliban. We cannot blame the United States only. We have the Chinese who are moving side by side by the Taliban is in order to strengthen them to have more monopoly over the power. If we talk about the security cameras which are being installed in Kabul city, they're all initiatives taken by the Chinese, and they propose the Taliban and help them technically and financially in order to have more control in the situation. If we see that the Iranians are now signing deals with the Taliban, it would furthermore strengthen the basis of the Taliban regime. If we see that the Russians are inviting the Taliban and somehow engaging them in regional dynamics, it means that the Taliban are more important for the region in order to confront them. The third thing would be very important to know that so far these regional powers have kept Hindukush as a strategic location and have not let the United States or maybe the other groups who are somehow a close friend to Taliban to conquer this area. Yeah. I think their main intention have been in two sides, not to let them to come to reach to Hindukush, because once they are in Hindukush, the next step will be easy to go forward. Neither one side they have been keeping an eye on Hindukush, the other side they have been in some sort of interaction and in connection with the Taliban and just giving them some privilege and money in order to keep them satisfied with the current situation. Because I told you before that the Afghanistan case is still in suspension. Yeah. Because of that, we don't see any kind of changes here. From other side, the more important factor is that Pakistan is now stuck with many challenges. I mean, the main responsible for this project was Pakistan. We see that the responsible of this project is stuck with challenges, and they don't give them any more further ideas to how to further pursue this project. Because of that, we see some sort of challenges ahead of this forward policy, which would provide a ground for the new grid game between the regional allies and the United States.
All right. I think that the discussion of the strategic importance of Afghanistan for all the superpowers around the world is quite apparent when we analyze the information as we have today. And of course, I would like to remind everyone that the matter of Afghanistan is still and continues to be neglected by the international media. And as we have discussed here today with Mr. Abdul Naser Noorzad, we can understand from what we have analyzed with little information here that Afghanistan's complexity and the game that's going on there, it just continues to raise more and more questions as you dig deeper into it. I think for now, it is important to note that the Americans, Iranians, Chinese, and Russians are all engaged in a war of interest in Afghanistan, and Taliban are the center of it at this point. And it's only a matter of time before certain advancements or any sort of advancements or changes are seen in Afghanistan in order to analyze which side the Taliban is really going to stick with. I'd like to thank Mr. Abdul Naser Noorzad, a political and geopolitical analyst, for attending our program today. I'd like to thank our audience for staying up with us. We'll have further discussions like this in the future. For now, have a good day, everyone.